Okay, so I did not include the areas of the brain in detail on the map when we went over all of the areas of the cerebrum and the lobes and their functions. So here's a visual map that we're going to just go over real fast. So as a kind of supplement, all right? You can see this is the right side of the patient, and this would be the left side. The eyeballs would be down here, eyeballs would be down here. You have the classic four lobes visible here: frontal, parietal on both sides, occipital, and the temporal lobe, which is on both sides, and the cerebellum. I think what's not included in here, and what we didn't have a chance to really show you, is an area called the insular lobes. So if you took and you divided these two lobes, you can actually kind of pull them apart. They actually have some gyri and some gray matter in here and in here, in between here, these areas. And so we really kind of need to label those as the insular lobes. That has the area of taste, the gustatory complex or cortex, and the vestibular cortex, which is conscious awareness of balance. So those are kind of deep, but they're still also a major area of the brain that we've kind of identified that's distinct from these other four lobes. Okay, another thing I want to direct your attention to, we talked about the prefrontal area, prefrontal cortex right here in social behavior, short-term working memory, also any processing or functioning that's higher level usually has to do with that, understanding standards of behavior. We talked about that, anticipating for the future and planning in that area. So that's kind of a very large area actually. The Broca's area on the left side only, and that has to do with speech movement. So the frontal lobes, that includes motor areas. These are all motor areas. So speech movement, I think, is a good thing to put down here. If you didn't have that, you'd know what you wanted to say, but you couldn't really articulate it. Also expression, that's going to be in that area too, Broca's area, only on the left side though. Another thing that's on the left side down here in the temporal lobe is the Wernicke's area. That's auditory association. That's involved with speech syntax. So that's kind of language, so understanding written and oral language is here. And grammar. So you wouldn't be able to make anything intelligible without this Wernicke's area. Okay, so maybe put down grammar here so you know syntax is also there as well. There's been stories of, for example, some little boy that they recovered as a toddler, I guess, or maybe he was like, I don't know. He'd been babbling, I guess, but he hadn't really developed language, and he was raised by wolves, literally, in France. And one thing that they noticed is he did not have the ability to form sentences and string sentences together. That has to develop early through infants listening to sentence structure and syntax. So he could say words and learn to say words other than just grunting and howling, but it was very difficult for him to actually talk. Then, interestingly enough, he was introduced into the germ pool, and since he'd been out of the germ pool associated with humans, he like died of things that like measles or smallpox or something that had already kind of been through, and his immune system couldn't survive. So yeah, it is good and important to have those antibodies. Okay, back to the brain. Auditory centers, of course, are in the temporal region. That's right by the ear. So they're going to be doing that processing of what you hear, and auditory association areas, so that you know and you've stored memories of what those sounds actually mean. Let's see, what's another thing? Down, we got visual areas and visual association areas. So you're going to be processing the sensory information in the occipital lobe back here. And then we're going to be accessing your memory and actually hopefully being able to tell what it is you're actually seeing in the visual association area. Back to the frontal lobe, we have, sometimes people call that frontal parietal area or parietal area the sensory motor area. Sensory's on the frontal side motors on the frontal side, sensory's on the parietal side. So yeah, you'll want to kind of label that a little bit better here. So motor, if you want to put an arrow there, sensory is here. Maybe you can label that. So that's the movement. Sensory association, though, of accessing. So let's say you're taking sensory information. That's going to go into the sensory area. But to know what those sensations mean, you need the sensory association. Okay, so it's one little gyre back here. Let's label that sensory association. Okay. And then we have also the premotor cortex here. That's involved with like whether or not you're going to decide to move, you know, you want a voluntary movement. So not just yeah, I'd say that we have to like decide to move. So let's do that. Prefrontal cortex here. And yeah, premotor areas, we kind of we mentioned it a little bit too. That's going to be involved with learning skills and trying to string together complicated series of movements that you don't want to be totally conscious of, where like riding a bike, you know, you're conscious you're doing it, but you have a lot of little steps that you're not having to think about because you have those stored in the motor association area. So primary motor area, motor association area. Motor association area is a little bit further forward here. So here's your premotor area. And that's your primary motor association area. Okay, so, and that's your primary sensory. Okay, so that hopefully gives you just an idea of where things are at. And remembering that numerical computation in math has to happen in both of these. In that they're calling it, sometimes people call it the frontal parietal area or the sensory motor area. And you're going to need, for higher processing math, you're really going to need that frontal cortex. Okay. So that kind of just maybe gives us a little bit of an idea. Also, I remember left hemisphere language, that's in speech movement, just to be able to talk, and Wernicke's understanding, written and oral language. So that's on the left side of your brain, and right side movements are just not specific to that language. It'll just be other movements in your motor area. Okay, so let me know if you have questions. Let me know if there's something I missed, and hopefully we can go over that. Thanks a lot for following along. I hope you have a good day.